Ever look at a dashboard and think, what do all these buttons do? It's like that, but with a cockpit. We're talking thousands of feet in the air, hurtling through the sky. Join us as we dive headfirst into the fascinating and slightly terrifying world of aviation. We're going to answer the question that's been keeping you up at night. What happens when you push every button in a cockpit? Now, before you get any bright ideas, let's be crystal clear. This is purely theoretical. Think of it as a virtual tour with a healthy dose of "don't try this at home" sprinkled in. It's about understanding the intricate systems that make flight possible. And maybe, just maybe, satisfying that little voice in your head that always wonders, what does this button do? We're all about safety here. That's why we've got certified flight instructors on our team, folks who eat, sleep, and breathe aviation. They'll be our guides on this wild ride, making sure we don't crash and burn. Figuratively speaking, of course. Think of this as a controlled demolition, not a free-for-all. We're going to methodically work our way through the cockpit, exploring each button and its function. But let's be honest, where's the fun in that? Sure, we'll cover the technical stuff, but we'll also delve into the hypothetical havoc that could unfold if we weren't so safety conscious. Imagine the alarms, the flashing lights, the bewildered air traffic controllers. So buckle up, grab your barf bags, just kidding, maybe, and get ready for a wild ride through the cockpit. All right, let's step inside this technological marvel, shall we? Picture this. You're in the cockpit, strapped into the pilot's seat. It's like sitting in front of the world's most complicated video game console. Except, the consequences of hitting the wrong button are a tad more serious than a game over screen. You've got your yoke or joystick. That's your steering wheel in the sky. Then there's the throttle, controlling the engine's power. But it's the sea of buttons, dials, and screens that really grab your attention. We've got the main instrument panel right in front of you, displaying all the crucial flight data: altitude, airspeed, heading, you name it. And then there are the overhead panels, home to a dazzling array of switches and circuit breakers. It's a symphony of systems, all working in perfect harmony. Now let's talk navigation. Getting lost at 35,000 feet is not exactly an option, right? That's where these babies come in, the navigation instruments. We're talking about the big leagues here: GPS, inertial navigation systems, even good old-fashioned compasses. These systems work together like a well-oiled machine, guiding the aircraft along its planned route. They take into account wind conditions, air traffic control instructions, and a whole bunch of other factors to ensure a smooth and safe journey. That's where the flight management system comes in, displaying the aircraft's position on a digital map. And don't forget about the radios, those trusty communication devices that keep pilots connected with the outside world. It's a lifeline in the sky, ensuring everyone stays informed and out of each other's way. Speaking of communication, let's not forget about the radios. These babies are the pilot's lifeline to the outside world, keeping them connected with air traffic control, other aircraft, and even ground crew. It's like a giant phone system in the sky, with different frequencies for different purposes. Then you've got your transponder, which is like the aircraft's ID card. It sends out a signal that tells air traffic control exactly where the plane is, its altitude, and its speed. And let's not forget about the weather radar. This nifty piece of equipment helps pilots navigate around storms and other nasty weather conditions. So there you have it. A glimpse into the fascinating world of cockpit instrumentation. All right, let's start with a big one, the autopilot. This technological marvel is a pilot's best friend, keeping the plane flying straight and level while they catch their breath or, grab a cup of coffee. Now, imagine hitting that engage autopilot button at the worst possible moment, like during takeoff, for instance. Instead of gracefully lifting into the air, the plane might decide to take a sudden detour, nosediving into the runway or veering off course like a confused pigeon. But let's crank up the mayhem a notch. What if we hit the disengage autopilot button while cruising at 35,000 feet? Suddenly, the pilots are back in control, but not for long. The plane might start bucking like a wild bronco, alarms blaring, and passengers clinging to their armrests for dear life. Of course, in reality, There are safeguards in place to prevent these kinds of scenarios. Next up, let's talk about weather warfare. No, we're not talking about controlling the elements like some kind of aviation superhero. We're talking about the systems that help pilots deal with Mother Nature's fury, things like de-icing equipment and weather radar. Imagine accidentally activating the de-icing system on a scorching summer day. You'd have hot water and chemicals spraying all over the plane, probably giving the passengers below a rather unwelcome shower. Now, let's crank up the chaos and mess with the weather radar. What if we flip the switch to ignore all storms? Suddenly, the pilots are flying blind into a raging thunderstorm, lightning flashing, turbulence shaking the plane like a maraca. Of course, in the real world, pilots rely on their training and judgment to use these systems safely and effectively. Now, let's delve into the exciting world of emergency systems. These are the buttons you hope you'll never have to touch, but it's good to know what they do, just in case. Take the fire suppression system, for example. It's designed to extinguish engine fires. But what if we accidentally triggered it mid-flight? We'd have a face full of fire suppressant and the engine would shut down, leaving us gliding through the air with one less fan. Talk about a mood killer. Then there's the oxygen masks, those yellow lifesavers that drop down from the overhead compartments when the cabin loses pressure. Imagine accidentally deploying them at cruising altitude. Suddenly, the cabin's filled with screaming passengers, frantically trying to put on their masks while simultaneously panicking about the possibility of plummeting to the earth. Of course, these systems are rigorously tested and designed to function flawlessly in real emergencies. Let's move on to the heart of the cockpit, the flight controls. We're talking about the yoke or joystick, the rudder pedals, and all those fancy trim tabs. These are the tools that allow pilots to maneuver the plane through the air. But what happens when we start messing with them willy-nilly? Imagine yanking back on the yoke while cruising at high altitude. Instead of a gentle climb, you might experience a sudden loss of lift, sending the plane into a stomach-churning stall. Or how about slamming the rudder pedals back and forth like you're playing a video game? The plane would start yawing wildly, passengers getting tossed around like rag dolls in a dryer. Of course, in reality, pilots are trained to make smooth, controlled inputs. Now, let's tune into the world of cockpit communication. We've got radios, transponders, and a whole bunch of other gadgets that help pilots stay connected with the outside world. But what happens when we start messing with those frequencies? Imagine accidentally keying the microphone while the captain's trying to make an important announcement. Suddenly, the airwaves are filled with the sound of your heavy breathing, or worse, your off-key rendition of Bohemian Rhapsody. Or how about accidentally switching the transponder to emergency squawk mode? That'll get you noticed by air traffic control real quick, and probably earn you a stern talking to once you land. Pilots need to be able to clearly and concisely convey information to air traffic control, other aircraft, and ground crew. But hey, it's fun to imagine the chaos that could ensue if we threw a wrench into the system. Now, for the grand finale, let's imagine what would happen if we pushed every single button in the cockpit all at once. It would be a symphony of malfunctions, a cacophony of alarms, and a recipe for utter chaos. The engines might sputter, the wings might ice up, the autopilot might decide to take a coffee break, all at the same time. It would be like a scene ripped straight out of an aviation disaster movie, only this time it's all happening in our imaginations. Of course, in reality, the odds of every single system failing simultaneously are astronomically slim. Aircraft are designed with multiple redundancies and fail-safes to prevent catastrophic events. Now, imagine this. You're cruising at 30,000 feet, the autopilot's doing its thing, and the pilots are enjoying a well-deserved cup of coffee. But what if, in a moment of sheer caffeine-deprived delirium, they accidentally hit the autopilot coffee request button? Yeah, you heard that right. We're talking about a theoretical button that doesn't exist. Yet. But in our world of hypothetical hilarity, this button is very real, and it's about to unleash chaos of the caffeinated kind. Picture the scene. The autopilot, suddenly possessed by an unquenchable thirst for Java, initiates an emergency descent. Alarms blare, passengers panic, and the flight attendants spill their carefully prepared beverage service all over the unsuspecting cabin. The pilots, jolted out of their caffeine-induced haze, scramble to regain control of the aircraft, desperately trying to explain to a bewildered air traffic control that they're not experiencing a mechanical failure, but rather a case of the autopilot's gone rogue for a cup of joe. Let's move on to something a little less caffeinated, but no less chaotic: the emergency slides. These inflatable lifesavers are designed to deploy in the event of an emergency evacuation, providing a quick and safe way for passengers to exit the aircraft. But what if, in a moment of sheer absent-mindedness, a flight attendant accidentally hit the deploy slides button while taxiing to the gate? Suddenly, the peaceful cabin erupts into a cacophony of hissing as the inflatable slides burst forth from their compartments, blocking the aisles and sending passengers tumbling like bowling pins. Outside, the ground crew stares in disbelief as the plane, seemingly possessed by a mind of its own, transforms into a giant inflatable bouncy house. Passengers, initially panicked, realize the absurdity of the situation and can't help but chuckle as they slide down the inflatable chutes, landing in a heap of laughter and bewildered relief. The captain, meanwhile, is on the radio with air traffic control trying to explain that they haven't crashed. They've just, well, accidentally deployed their party favors a little prematurely. And finally, no discussion of unexpected cockpit outcomes would be complete without mentioning the dreaded bird strike. These avian encounters, while usually harmless, can sometimes cause significant damage to aircraft, particularly if they occur during critical phases of flight. But what if, instead of causing damage, a bird strike triggered some kind of bizarre, unintended consequence? Imagine this. The plane is cruising along, minding its own business, when suddenly, a flock of birds collides with the aircraft's nose. Instead of the usual thud and shower of feathers, the collision triggers a hidden disco ball in the cockpit, bathing the pilots in a kaleidoscope of flashing lights. The onboard sound system kicks in, blasting out a catchy disco beat, and the autopilot, seemingly caught up in the moment, starts making the plane perform a series of elaborate aerial maneuvers that can only be described as the bird strike boogie. The passengers, initially terrified, can't help but laugh as their plane transforms into a giant disco ball in the sky, their fear replaced by a sense of surreal amusement. Section 1. Behind the button, unraveling the science of flight. Every button, switch, and dial in that cockpit is there for a reason. Each one represents a critical system, a piece of the puzzle that makes flight possible. Take the autopilot, for instance. It's a complex computer system that uses sensors, gyroscopes, and a whole lot of math. Then there's the weather radar, our window into the invisible world of storms and turbulence. By interpreting these signals, pilots can see approaching weather systems. And let's not forget about the radios, those unsung heroes of aviation communication. Redundancy and the art of not crashing. Aviation is obsessed with safety. Aircraft are designed with multiple layers of redundancy. If one system fails, there's a backup ready to take over. Most commercial aircraft have at least 2 engines. If one engine fails, the plane can still fly safely. The same goes for other critical systems: backup hydraulic, electrical, and flight control systems. Section 1. Respect the button. Respect the sky. So, what have we learned from our little theoretical joyride? For starters, those buttons ain't there for decoration. That cockpit's a finely tuned machine, a testament to human ingenuity and our relentless pursuit of conquering the skies. Each button represents countless hours of engineering, testing, and refinement. It's a system built on precision, on understanding the delicate balance of forces that keeps a hunk of metal soaring through the air. Pushing every button at once? That ain't bravery, that's just asking for trouble. But here's the real takeaway. Aviation, at its core, is about respect. Respect for the technology, respect for the people who design and build these incredible machines, and above all, respect for the power and unpredictability of the sky itself. It's a humbling reminder that no matter how advanced our technology becomes, we're still at the mercy of forces far greater than ourselves. So, next time you're lucky enough to be on a plane, take a moment to appreciate the complexity and beauty of it all. And as for those buttons, let's leave them to the pros, shall we? They've earned it.